All right, thank you. So I'm going to start out. I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then I'll let the audience go from there. My first question is on WebRTC Frameworks. I got a couple questions during the intermission, and some of the questions that came up. Many of you, or most of you, are using, it looks like, the native WebRTC APIs and JavaScript. You chose not to go out and use some commercial framework or even some open source framework to develop that. Maybe you can comment a little more your reasons why you decided to go, build with the raw APIs instead of using a higher level framework.
So in my case with Meetspace, I'm trying to do something better than everybody else has ever done it. And so in that case, I knew it was either going to have to be something that I built myself, or at least I needed to really learn the hard way what all the challenges were in order to evaluate something that was off the shelf. So that was my reasoning for it. I do use the WebRTC adapter though, because it makes my life easy.
Yeah, it's a standard buy versus build question. And, for getting something up and running, like grabbing a framework and just going, and then focusing the time on, what we felt was important, and then realizing, okay, we can come back and working on that API later. So I think it's a question of where's the value in the company, and for us, it's that layer on top.
For us, it was mostly because we're running a Cordova app, so and our use case is simple enough that using the native sort of methods and what comes with the browser seemed easy enough, and because of FlexRTC.
Joe?
I actually use WebRTC gateways. Like I've used Asterisk before, and I've used Janus as well. I actually really like Janus as a gateway to do some functionality like recording on the server side and things like that.
Okay. So yeah, I guess that requires that you use at least their APIs and frameworks for those pieces, right? All right. The next big area that we didn't really spend a whole lot of time on, Desmond, I think you covered it most, and I'll let you go first, was on native mobile support. And you're using the iOS RTC, Cordova plugin. Maybe you can tell us a little more, like, how did you consider implementing native mobile? Was mobile first your consideration, or did you just look at Cordova as an easy way of supporting mobile and web and just went that route?
I mean, part of it was we got sort of lucky that iOS RTC exists. I mean, we were a native app before we had video calling, right? I mean, we had an application before we had video calling. So for us, it's more about we have a small team that is mostly JavaScript developers. So this is the way it ended up, and we were able to use Cordova with iOS RTC. I don't know. Yeah, it was, but our application came before the video calling, so.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't have to do too much about it.
Have you run into any big problems using Cordova in that approach and kind of the hyperweb framework? Is it doing what you need it to do?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's pretty solid. It's a pretty contributed to project. Yeah, there's no flaws so far. I mean, they keep up pretty well with, the latest versions of WebRTC and that sort of thing.
Okay. All right, maybe we'll transition to Joseph. I mean, what are your thoughts on native mobile support? Is that something you're looking at, or you thought about yet?
So that's something that we've been exploring, but not fully explored yet. So it's definitely important, but it's something that I haven't dove into considerably yet.
All right, and I guess for you, Samson, too, especially doing higher processing power, computer vision, how do you think about mobile, and where does that fit into Cyclops, your approach there?
So it's definitely on the roadmap. On an iOS device, where we have more control, once it has to be a native application, we have more control there. So we'll definitely take advantage of the GPU, and there are actually pretty good GPUs on phones nowadays. And I think it's going to be a little bit of an art to get it there, but it looks totally feasible from everything we've seen so far.
Nick?
No, I'm the boring one. We're not looking at mobile right now.
Yeah, just because it doesn't fit your application use case?
Yeah, based on the research for our users, it's not how they hold their meetings. When you've got a bunch of people around a table trying to figure out, how to implement some software algorithm or something else there at their laptops. They probably were just in Slack saying, okay, let's talk about this. And so nobody's driving in their car to call into the whiteboard meeting, I guess, in our situation.
I want to open things up to the audience. Maybe Tom, do you mind just passing the microphone around just to make things a little smoother? Are there audience questions before I dive into a bunch more? Why don't we start with the gentleman in the front here?
I'm just curious about security. Do you guys have to deal with that or no? Or is it okay just over HTTPS?
Who wants to say that first before I pick on someone? Well, yeah, Desmond. Yeah, why
Yeah, I
don't you-
mean, so in healthcare, we have to worry about PHI, which is like your patient health information. It has to be very secure. For us, the sort of security that's defaulted and sort of built into WebRTC, along with HTTPS, is enough for us. We don't share any sort of PHI over our WebRTC connection, so it's fine for us.
I'll dive in. So I'll echo those remarks. Right, everything is fully encrypted end to end, which is certainly as a startup is more than enough for the people we're talking to. It's actually interesting. I've read articles on security in WebRTC, but I don't think anybody has actually stood up and said, yes, this is compliant to such and such standards. I think it would be really valuable for the community if somebody got up and said, yes, we hit these compliance check marks.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask Joe too, since the situation is a little bit different. I guess when you deal with gateways and that aspect, and that is a vulnerability, attack vector, right? So how do you think about security from that perspective?
I mean, so far the built-in security for WebRTC and SSL has been enough for us.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, the built-in's really strong. I've actually had a couple users who came to us because they didn't trust Google. They didn't want their audio video going through Google servers to be transcoded. So finding something that was peer-to-peer was very important to them. So I thought that was pretty paranoid. But getting all that stuff out of the box is very nice.
All right, we had.
Yeah. Yeah, so I asked earlier about the Coturn project. I know that you guys on the right, you were using it. You guys aren't using it for the turn part, just the signaling part, right? Because I just wanted to confirm the turn part means you're using it as a relay. Is that, and you're doing peer-to-peer connections. And so also wanted to the panel just ask, is everybody using the Coturn project for turn and stun servers?
So I can start with
Go,
this one.
go ahead, yeah, since you.
So we're using Coturn, and when you say signaling, usually what people mean when they say signaling for WebRTC is the ICE exchange and the SDP exchange, and that's something you usually have to do yourself. So in our case, we're using WebSockets. I think you mentioned you're using Socket.io. For stun and turn, that's the Coturn server, and stun is the one that exchanges public IP information. And after that exchange, you can go peer-to-peer. And turn is, you're right, you're going to a relay where the audio and video data is being relayed through that server. So we're using Coturn for stun and turn, and using our own server for the signaling.
I'll let the other panelists comment. I did want to just make it clear, since we did have a bunch of new people here, like why you need a turn server. WebRTC is peer-to-peer, but there are scenarios where firewalls don't let that connection through go peer-to-peer, right? In that case, you actually do need to have a turn server. There's mechanisms that basically, the ICE that Nick mentioned, the ICE Interactive Connectivity Exchange, that basically tries to connect every way possible it can. Right, and WebRTC, the stack will choose the best option, the peer-to-peer option if it's there. But if it's not, then you can use a turn server, which essentially relays the media through a point to allow that connection. Is it mandatory? No, but should you have it? In most cases, yes. It's anywhere between 4% and 25% of typical calls might need it. It depends a lot on the environment and the scenario, but you do need a return server, and that's one reason I think everyone here has actually talked about it.
And I want to throw in something really quick. When I was first starting out, Google runs an open stun server. And that'll be good enough for you for a lot of cases, except when you're behind a really bad firewall. Just use Google's Stun server when you're playing around, or like when you're at a hackathon or something. Like, don't bother with it until you need to own it.
Yeah. Other comments on turn, I guess specifically co-turn and implementing the turn services?
Yeah, same as that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just add, I think Xerxes provides turn servers for, I think their cheapest is like $20 a month. You know, it's not so hard to set up your own turn server, but you know, if you don't really want to maintain your own, you know, it's totally isolated within, I think, one command. So, yeah, it's great so that you can focus on what's important. And then if that becomes important, you can come back later and then do that part.
All right. I think you were using Twilio?
Yeah, we use
Yeah.
Twilio for both stun and turn.
Yeah.
So Matt, that gentleman who was asking all the awesome questions, and I are former coworkers and co-hosts for our company luncheon. So I'm glad to know that we both still are the people that ask the most questions. So hi, thanks for a great panel and a great event. So I have a general question regarding Google I/O, the big theme, obviously building for the next billion that are coming online. So can you maybe just talk about how you see WebRTC with kind of like lower grade phones with not so good GPUs, like you said, and you know, lower bandwidth, et cetera. And I know a lot of you are developing for what seems to be corporate, but
Yeah,
curious.
maybe I'll let Nick start with that since he's been trying to push WebRTC to its lower limits.
Yeah. So what I really want to see is, well, once we get these specs nailed down, I really want to see hardware support that can follow along with that. Because right now, the fact that the browser is doing software encoding is silly. There are powerful GPUs in your computer and in your phone that, if they're able to be leveraged for video encoding, or if specific video encoding hardware chips are present on phones, being able to leverage those for the encoding would save so much, at least in terms of CPU. In terms of bandwidth, there are new codecs all the time. VP9 is improving on bandwidth at the cost of CPU. So personally, I want to see more CPU encoding, or more hardware encoding off of the CPU. And I think that's where it's going to need to go to be able to support higher quality, especially going to like 4K. I can't even imagine going to 4K. I'm doing 240p, right? So you're going to need hardware for that.
Yeah, maybe I'll let Desmond, you can comment next. I mean, it seems you can't always guarantee your patients are going to have a good quality connection. You probably want to be able to go as far as you can. That actually adds more value for the telehealth solution, right? You want it in places where people actually don't have easy access, and that tends to be not good internet access too. How do you consider that?
Yeah, right. So in a lot of ways, like we offer the opportunity to go audio only, or yeah, we also supplement this with text as well. So we do have a text chat. But for the most part, I mean, a lot of our customers are, yeah, we're not servicing like third world countries or anything at that point. So it's, you know, or areas that are remote. You know, most of our customers are on broadband connections and that sort of thing. So it's not a huge concern for us at this point. Yeah, I would say like before, it's mostly dependent on the connection. I think because it's peer-to-peer, you don't really have to worry about the architecture that's available in the area. So, you know, if a doctor's on vacation in Bali or something like that, and they have a 3G connection that they can pay for or something like that for the time being, you know, they're fine. You know, they don't have to worry about what sort of server architecture is available in Bali. That's as far ahead as I can think of.
Other panelists, you don't have to comment if you don't want to.
No, I don't have too much more on this. On the data side, the amount of data that you're pushing through is so small relative to especially the video bandwidth that you're using. It's not as,
Mr. Chris Allen?
Yes. I realize most of you guys are kind of doing peer-to-peer stuff, but since my company builds a media server, I'm curious what you guys think of kind of having the role of a server in the middle with these applications, and is there anything, obviously you with your gateway solution probably are thinking more along those lines, and you use Janus But for the rest of you guys, what has your experience been in terms of moving a lot of this stuff to cloud infrastructure as opposed to peer-to-peer client?
Sorry, what do you mean by cloud versus peer-to-peer? Or by cloud, you mean your server side, right?
Yeah, well,
Server side, yes. And
Yeah, okay.
yeah. I mean, I'll say, Nick, one of your you've been trying to push as many users through peer-to-peer as possible by, lowering the capability, so you don't need to have server-side infrastructure.
Yes.
Do you think there's a limit to that? Would you ever?
We're at the limit.
Yeah. Would you ever go to use a media server?
Yeah,
upgrade a media server. Is that part of your plan? Or are you absolutely trying to avoid that at all costs?
Well, it's not part of my immediate plan,
Thank
and
you
it's
for
not
phrasing that correctly.
politely, and it's not like I have any grudge against it or any reason not to use a server. It was that the thing that was most important to the users that I was talking to that they were frustrated with were things that were solved by peer-to-peer that were not as possible through a server. So I had one of my alpha testers is in Manitoba, and his client is in Dublin. And I don't care how many availability zones you use, you're going to make a bunch of hops if you've got to run those guys through a server, right? But when they were on Meetspace, their audio delay was 120 milliseconds because it was peer-to-peer. So I think the server could be really useful, especially for some of one of my users in particular who's on a MacBook, like Core M processor, who was only able to use Meetspace audio only. He would really benefit from a server that could handle a lot of that transcoding for him. So to me, I see the server like I see a turn server. It's not my first choice, but it can help when you're in an adverse situation, either because of your CPU that's available to you, or if you wanted to build another, like a recording feature, for example, that would be useful as well. And then we certainly do have our own issues with peer-to-peer. Like we get these funky net split situations where John can't see Joe, but Jill can see one of them, and then this other guy can see two, but not all three, and it's like, what's going on? So different random people can drop out, and it's not really known among everybody who's really connected. So we get funky bugs like that instead. So we try to tackle that just with the way that our protocol over the signaling server works, by being very persistent and resilient, being able to take any information it gets and resolve very quickly any drops that occur. But yeah, I think having the server there would add some reliability, but in our case, it would compromise some of the core features of Meetspace.
Yeah, I'll ask Samson the comment next, since you do a lot of computer vision processing.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff is traditionally not done, or the more processing you want to do, the more you actually want to have a server doing it, because it's going to be faster and reduce less battery, right? So how do you think about that for Cyclops in your application?
So I expect that we're going to end up in the cloud. Very bluntly, there's only so many resources we can use, right? We don't want to have that blaring fan turn on. It really makes the audio not particularly great. So once you're above a certain number of people, there's not really much of a choice. And at some point, you can't assume you're the only application running. So if you really want the most seamless experience with a lot of people, you don't really have any choice.
Desmond, I mean, you're mostly, I guess, a one-to-one. Do you do multi-party usage situations?
Not at this time, no.
How about recording? Do you see that as being something that?
No, I mean, most of that is because of PHI. So we can't have anything. I mean, we can't be recording things that have patients' names and that sort of thing. Yeah, we're under very tight.
Yeah, so I
security
guess you
scrutiny.
see more security, more server-side stuff is just more of a liability. Is more stuff you have to worry about.
Yeah.
Being compliant.
And because we're such a small team, the cost benefit is just peer-to-peer is easier for us, instead of running our own server.
Okay. And Joseph, I am very interested in you sharing your opinion on working with some of the open source platforms out there that do act as media servers. Maybe you can share your experiences there.
I really like servers. I'm a back-end guy, and I think they're really powerful and can augment the capability of the device, accessing the resources, not just the processing, but the data in the cloud, and that's really important there. So, you know, there's also there's always the features of the recording, multi-party conferencing, but also I touched on in my talk about the various types of AI that you can connect in, chatbots and things like that, and that's where you'd really want to take advantage of cloud resources. So where you're not talking to a person, but you're talking to a set of servers that are running and processing, you know, the data that you're passing in real time.
Okay. I think we have time for one more. Anyone else? Anyone else other than the other Chris McKay?
One of the things I really liked about Nick's presentation was focus on the user aspects, the survey that you did, and it was really wonderful to see how those affected your design considerations through that. And I was wondering if the other panelists had done any user research that affected your UI and UX and the products that you have, and you know, what were some of the tidbits or findings that maybe you saw as well?
One I would share is pretty much an aha moment when somebody was, they had a problem of people working on a collaborative project together, and they had thought about just adding voice and video, but not so much connecting their experience for, you know, being able to look at groups of assets of images and videos together and be able to watch a video together, either one of them pause it, talk about certain elements, and the power of the interactive experience was really, I guess, a really great user experience to see somebody experience that for the first time, and how powerful that was for them. So that was just kind of one example of a person reacting to something that we thought maybe it would be cool, but it was really useful for them.
Desmond or Samson?
Yeah.
You want to comment?
We have a customer success team that sort of surveys and monitors customers' experiences with video calling. That's sort of our main way, since we don't have logging at the current time. That's sort of our main way of knowing how things are going. And we've done studies and sort of, UX-related studies. We have a graphics design team as well that does sort of the same thing, that handles the whole of the application, but they've also done a few things with the video chat as well. Nothing related to like video call quality.
You know, for us, it's all about what does collaboration actually mean. And you know, I think we found out pretty early that just showing a video wasn't collaboration. And so a lot of it for us, you know, we're an early stage company. You know, we're literally sitting down, making phone calls, getting feedback, you know, throwing ideas over and seeing how people respond and use our features. And you know, literally, we're getting voice feedback today by talking to folks.
All right, thanks.
If I can throw one last thing, if you thought that was pretty neat, our most recent blog post is about how our users picked our pricing. So the price of the product was determined entirely by user surveys and a particular algorithm from 1986 or so. And you can read the pretty in-depth blog post with pretty pictures on there. And that's where our pricing comes from.
All right, thanks, guys. Unfortunately, we do need to wrap things up so our gracious hosts can go home. I will say, I mean, we do need to probably make our way out here in the next couple of minutes. I'll be going to a mead hall. We usually hang out there for a little while. If we can continue the conversation there, I welcome you all to join us. With that, I'd like to thank all our presenters. I was really excited to have a bunch of new faces here, startups talk about their experiences. In most cases, these guys are they're relatively new to Webrtc. In the past, we've had a lot of, I'd say, hardcore engineers that have been doing it forever. So it's great to get some different perspectives. And thank you again to the Google team for the food and the great facility.
And thank you, Chad, for organizing.
Yeah, thanks, Chad.